I think, a lot of Americans see it that way. Certainly the viewers to this show view it that way. Whether the senators are going to, move, I don't know. But there is still a lot that people can do, especially on a state level, that maybe they haven't thought of, because your book is quite illuminating in this regard. It points us into so many different ways that people can use the state system to highlight all the injustices going on. I want to run through some of these. I'm going to run from 10 to 1. I don't know which order you'd like to go, and I hope that's okay.
Okay.
And I'm going to these may differ a little bit than the ones you had in terms of verbiage, but it's what I could fit in. So it starts with asymmetric warfare. So it starts with this idea that, why don't you explain what you mean by that? I guess you just have. I don't know if you want to add anything.
Yeah, I mean, you can let one side play by one set of rules, and then they force you to play by the other. You just say no. I mean, you do what Mitch McConnell does. You just go do it. And here's the thing, that I had a state house member who I know, who's a Republican, and we disagree on everything. He's somewhat infamous in the state house, but I've known him for 20 years. He tweeted at me after I said they must pass the Voting Rights Act. I put the chance of that at 0%. They're laughing at Democrats who don't stand up and fight. And my attitude on the asymmetric warfare, surprise them by how hard you fight. Make them stay all night, every day. They should have run all the way through that holiday vacation.
The Democrats in the Senate are not behaving like this. It's not in their nature to do this. They're not suddenly going to discover this weird muscle that you're describing here.
Right. They need to.
Yeah, they're not going to. I can tell you that we've tried.
Well, it's unacceptable. I mean, those Texas legislators left their homes, left the state because they were alarmed. Stacey Abrams, to great risk, she said, I'm not going to be the governor, but she didn't concede. She called out the illegitimacy. One of the things that I put in this book is, and this is why the Orban conversation is so important, competitive autocracies rely on the sense that everything is legitimate. And so if you go along and act like it's legitimate, you're giving them the gift they want. Every U.S. senator, like Stacey Abrams did, like those Texas State House members, you need to say this is not legitimate, and your behavior should reflect that. And kind of being calm and saying, sure, you can have a filibuster without doing anything. To me, that's sending a signal that you don't think it's that big a deal, and I think it's a huge mistake.
But isn't that exactly what it feels like is going on? It feels like the Democrats, or at least some Democrats, have bought into some of the change that the Republicans might have wanted, and that they're not fighting as hard. It certainly seems to me like, a lot of the time they're putting up sort of a show, but they're not diving in there as much as they could. I know it's easy to say on the outside looking in when you've only got 48 real seats in the Senate, but, it just feels like that.
In the last month of last year, it was good to see a lot of Democrats actually saying, I think we should get rid of the filibuster.
Yeah.
I'm warning to do that. And I agree with Chuck Schumer. Call the vote.
Absolutely. Call the vote on everything.
It's hiding behind, because I don't think it's just one or two. I think they're more. Yeah. And I think they let a few take all the heat. And if you, in the end, aren't willing to do this, you're not for democracy. I'm sorry. And I say this to people who I respect. You are letting democracy die if you let this filibuster stand in the way of your constitutional oath to protect democracy in states. And again, you're also being played the fool.
Yep.
Mitch McConnell is laughing. The people in these state houses are like, wait, I passed my bill. I didn't even care what the Democrats thought. I didn't even talk to them. It was written in some conference room, and I passed it. But these fools in D.C. are going to sit around and require that Rob Portman and Susan Collins sign on. They're laughing. Yeah. And my attitude is, don't have him laughing. Have him shocked, because you fought harder for democracy than anything they've ever seen you fight for. And that's important for the other side to see. It's important for everyday citizens to see, because if you act casual about it, the everyday citizens, the ones who aren't paying attention, are going to say, well, is democracy really in trouble if they don't even seem to act like it is? No, they're going to read from the casualness. And by the way, many senators are very fired about this. I don't want to minimize it. There are many. But as a group, it needs to be like, we don't need another speech. We need some passion and a little bit of anger and the same toughness that I hate to say Mitch McConnell shows.
Yeah.
He doesn't care.
He doesn't care. And, there's a lot of Republicans, maybe not a lot, there's probably one or two Republicans that can be shamed if they're concerned about their re-election opportunities, who can be shamed into voting for some of the stuff that they would otherwise not, because they're hiding behind Mitch and about, basically.
And let's be clear. If you do a poll today, and one of the things this Freedom to Vote Act does is it creates a broader template of how many drop boxes you have per person. If you did a poll today, you want more drop boxes in your state, the poll is 80-20. These are generally very popular things. As you said, I think you can move people. We had a straight up vote in Ohio on changing the Constitution to end partisan gerrymandering. It passed 75-25. Overwhelming. In what world do people like, rigged anything, let alone elections where politicians do whatever they want and can never lose? So the truth is, there are a lot of pressure points
that you could hit hard on, but if you don't bring the argument, no one ever hears it.
Right. And maybe that's something is just as the actual takeaway that people can take away from these points you're suggesting here. In your local state races, find the people that are vulnerable to this pressure, because there are pressure points. There's a lot of people who are going to lose their political careers if they don't sign on to some of these bills. We need to highlight that. And I think that there's an opportunity there to identify.
Another one to 10. I don't know if it's in your group. And even if they can't lose because they're in a district they cannot lose, still run against them and call them out every day for a year.
Yeah.
Because where they really win is when we don't challenge. They don't want a challenger. That's why they rig the districts. And when we don't run, they get to say whatever they want for 9 months. No one challenges them. So one thing we have to do, declare victory when people run in really tough districts and treat them like heroes for democracy that they are, and get them enough resources so they can point out all these things, as opposed to leaving them for dead because we have 5 swing districts we care about. We have to broaden the conversation. Just make sure it's clear this is a long game. And if you run every year in every district, you're far better off than if you leave 30 out of 99 districts without an opponent, where they're mopping up and they're putting all their money into the swing districts.
Absolutely.
They've been fighting this game for decades, and we haven't. And it's one reason why we haven't made inroads.
And when you talk to people in the Democratic Party, they're saying that a lot of this money is already being allocated. Like the real money for next year is already, been spent. And in fact, we're not going to see a very much of a different strategy going into this next election cycle, which is why the predictions are so dire for Democrats.
Yeah. No, my worry is that is a potential reality. 2 things can fix that. One, there's a revolution in small dollar giving. And organizations, and I'm talking to a few who are thinking about this, if we can kind of create enough of a firestorm around democracy everywhere, every year, and say, give a little bit every month, and that'll let us support candidates in every district in Ohio. A $20,000 campaign in a small rural district is a lot of money. It's
Absolutely.
a rounding error at a statewide, and it's not even in the conversation federally. So I think there's some power in digital, in online giving, small dollars monthly. But here's the other thing I'd say if I ever had a room, and I've tried to get this to some of these donors, but I had a room with big donors, I'd say, listen, guys, take 6% of what you spend in the presidential, which is billions, and set it aside. You'll find other resources for that presidential anyway. Take 6% of it and invest it in all 50 states every single year to run candidates, to build up voting registration operations. Sorry about my thing. You name it. And that money will go so much further. And by the way, you'll do better in the presidential race too, because you built something.
I like what you're saying so much about this idea of creating, a organization or a digital presence of some sort that allows people to find out where they should be adding their pressure points. Because I think people are very confused by the enormous challenge of trying to figure out which candidates are the right candidates, which issues are the right issues. Even on, on the voters' bill, there's something really important there that can be done, I think, just in terms of identifying who the most vulnerable senators might be. I mean, we don't know who those vulnerable senators are. You might have a better idea. Other people, inside the Beltway might be able to have a better idea of who the more vulnerable people are. But people on the outside don't know. So if we had those names and we knew where we could send out $20 bills, that might be more effective in terms of getting us through that.
Yeah.
I'd really love that idea.
One thing, though, I want to say is sometimes, and this is going to sound counterintuitive and maybe pie in the sky, but even if the person isn't the best candidate, like, put it this way, Democrats are waiting for Barack Obama and Stacey Abrams to save us. Republicans put people in seats everywhere and say, go win, and they win and they're in power. So we have to say to anyone who will step up, especially in the hard districts, you are a hero. And we are raising enough money through small dollar donations that when you start your campaign, you're not going to have 6 figures, but you're going to have enough to get your name and message out. And do that as many states as possible, knowing, by the way, that most of you are going to lose. But running everywhere means you win somewhere, means you force them to share resources and not only go after the 5 swing seats. Virginia was a great example. And so in my book, it's not just pie in the sky. I go through case studies. The Virginia General Assembly was gerrymandered in 11, like everyone else. And 2 straight elections, they ran everywhere in 17 and 19. They ran many more candidates than Republicans. They picked people who knew their community. They had a diverse group of candidates. And over those 2 cycles, they defeated the Republican gerrymander. In Ohio, we didn't flip a single district for 6 years after the gerrymander. In 18, first year we had candidates in all 99 districts. We flipped 6.
Interesting.
You got to run everywhere. Again, don't overpromise, underdeliver. But you have to have a conversation with these candidates where you say, you are part of the big team of democracy, and you are stepping up. And by the way, if you don't win, maybe run again. About 3 of the 6 people I mentioned who won in 18, they ran in 16 and lost. They kept running. Just like Stacey Abrams, perfect example. She knows this is a long game. So she didn't win her governor's race, and there was a whole lot of, voter suppression that happened. Did she quit? No, she actually, the night of that speech, she said, we made progress. a lot of people probably thought, really? Well, who was right? She was, because every door knocked on, every voter registered, everyone fired up, kept going. They're now on your database. And lo and behold, 2 years later, Georgia's blue. So we've got to redefine this as a battle for democracy, not a battle over swing states and federal elections. And once we define it that way, the teams change. Embrace Republicans who actually support democracy. There are not many left.
Yeah.
But
no, there are. There are people. There are plenty out there.
They are there. Define it as a long game so you don't go home and cry every time you don't win every 2 years. But if you built something, keep building. And you got to do it all over. You can't just pick 10 states and say the rest of you, we're going to allow you to live without democracy. And I mean, again, that's a violation of the Constitution. No one in any state should live in a state that isn't a functioning democracy. We don't want that in the world. Why would we let it happen in states in America?
Absolutely. So there's a guarantee about that. And of course, the House is just on a knife's edge in the next round. I mean, any number, just a handful of seats could flip the House in one way or another, and that would change the trajectory of history. You also said here, this is number 9, prioritize democracy above everything else. So tell us a line about that.
Yeah. I mean, if you can break bread with someone who you disagree with on other issues, do it. That sounds naive in 2022. Reagan and Bush both signed the Voting Rights Act. Though the Senate passed the Voting Rights Act in those years, something like 97 or 98 votes. It wasn't that long ago that this was bipartisan. Right. I'm not naive, but there are some Republicans, and some of them have left the party, others are quiet, who I think still believe in democracy. And I think we have to embrace people we disagree with. And that also means moderates, to the extent they support democracy, and progressives also go fight about other things. But if you're on the same page of democracy, that's even more important. One last thing, and this is really important, and it's sort of counterintuitive. I think, although I get it, and it was amazing they would beat Trump, defining the other side as never Trump is far too narrow. The attack on democracy preceded Trump. It will continue, and the powers of these states will continue if Trump doesn't run in 24, if he's not around 5 years later. What they are building is about democracy. Just like I say in the book, Andrew Johnson was controversial. He didn't support the South. It'd be like saying you have a never Andrew Johnson movement instead of a never Jim Crow movement.
Right.
We are defining it too narrowly, and what that has done, and I think this is part of what happened in 20, it gave a lot of Republicans who didn't like Trump a license to vote for Republicans the rest of the way, even though those Republicans, although they didn't feel like Trump, they were more civil than Trump, they're against democracy just like he is. They're just more savvy about it or quiet about it. So I think every single voter who cares about democracy needs to say, even if you don't like Trump, I don't care. Are you for democracy?
I love that, especially because we've seen that. We've seen these Republicans destroy democracy in the middle of this country, as you point out. Let's call them out on that all the time. They shouldn't be able to go through an election cycle without every day this being reminded of them.
And even if they're genteel, some of these goofballs walk the Edmund Pettus Bridge and send photos out. And then they say the Voting Rights Act would federalize elections. That was the whole damn point, folks. So if you see people doing that, don't think never Trump. Well, that guy seems okay. He's against democracy. Never vote for him. Get him out of office.
Yeah, and almost every Republican in office in the state houses is against democracy, as they are in the federal houses. You've also said here, expose election corruption. I mean, that's kind of obvious, but it's not really, because we don't spend enough time saying where the votes are rigged and looking at it and highlighting where the rigging is happening, because it's happening everywhere and it's systemic.
You got to call it out. One of the ways I think about this is election night in America is literally like a holiday. We have panels of CNN and MSNBC. We have special music we all can recognize, and we all watch it. And this is what competitive autocracy wants. It legitimizes everything. And that's fine if these were fair elections. There should be as much coverage right now over the rigging of congressional districts. Put the panel up, play the fancy music. Tonight, they determined 13 races in Ohio out of 15. They just determined those. So we don't all sit around next year and somehow act as if it was a surprise. So I think we all still are so excited to believe in our unique democracy that we're unwilling to call out where it's flawed. And that's why we need to be much more clear cut on not everything's broken, but where it is broken. Some of the stuff they're seeing on the other side is obviously absurd, but rigging elections so you and I can predict 99% of state house races in Ohio for 10 years, that should be front page above the fold.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just not covered. It's just not covered.
Yeah,
I mean, it might get a mention in the local newscast.
On the election itself.
Yeah, exactly.
So we all sort of play into it, and it legitimizes, which is what they want.
Well, the local news story that is another one of your points that we'll come to, but the fact that local newsrooms have been bankrupted of any real journalism, and the fact that local TV stations no longer really function as local TV stations, this is tragic, because there's no one actually on a local level looking at what's going on in terms of these election gerrymandering and the rigging. And there are people who are capable in each of these states who can get on the internet, because we now have the capability to do shows like this, who can get the word out. I hope people listening tonight, wherever they might be in America, if they encounter these kinds of efforts to rig the vote or change the vote, gerrymandering that are not getting the light that they deserve from journalists, that they put it out themselves. You've got your phone, you've got your Twitter accounts, record something, put something out, express to the world what's going wrong in your area, because you are the local media there now. There is no other.
That's literally why I wrote the book. Yeah. I was sitting around tweeting something. I thought, I shouldn't tweet this. I need to write this. Yeah. And if you look at, now it seemed, I'm sure my wife is wondering, what the heck's happening to my husband? But almost every day I do a whiteboard, which gets viewed a lot, 50, 60,000 views, sometimes more. It's my effort to just inform people. Like, it may seem desperate, but I don't see enough else out there. If people follow me on Twitter, they'll see all this stuff at David Pepper. But yeah, we all need to get it out there. And what's happening with journalism is exactly that. I mean, they are being, and it's a perfect situation for, again, Alec, the Koch brothers. Because as I said, this is about, I call it the 80-20 rule in my book. Throw everything at the wall. And 80% of it may not pass, but 20% will. They'll cover the 80%. They may not even get to the 20, but the throw out, it's kind of like what you said, the fake news or the Madison Cawthorn story. They'll throw some crazy idea out there. It gets all the news coverage. It gets crushed by the legislature in the end because it did get exposed. In the meantime, they passed 3 other things that never were in a story. Yeah. So they know there's limited coverage. And by the way, one other thing, and this is going to sound really in the weeds, who do you cut in journalism when you're running out of money? You cut the columnists and the ed boards, the people with some institutional history that can cut through the clutter and explain that's the most ridiculous map of all time. Straight news have to generally do both sides. So you also are seeing the long-term, shoe leather, more expensive, more senior reporters be the first to go. And that ends up meaning that any kind of neutral analysis disappears, and all you get is Fox News or tweets from one side or the other. So there's a lot of tendons being cut in the media beyond just the fact that these papers are a lot smaller.
And especially the investigative teams, which is where a lot of this stuff comes out of. Those are the first to go. A lot of these newsrooms are just gutted. They have nobody in them. They have no journalists. They print papers, but they have nobody in them, really.
Yeah, I mean, in Ohio, I'll give credit. We still have some really good journalists, and they do a good job. But if I talk to them candidly, they're like, we're overwhelmed. We're exhausted.
Yeah.
We can't keep up with every new iteration of this horribly rigged map. And these are the people who've been around a long time. So, the average state house, one study found, has 3 reporters per state house. That is literally a dream of those who want to take over state houses and do undemocratic things.
And it does take time and experience to work through those institutions and know what's what. You can't just throw these rookie reporters in these situations. But I think this idea that, people are empowered. They have their phones. They have their video cameras. They can pop up anything that they find and they can put it up on Twitter. It's so powerful when some of these things get sent around and become viral, as you point out. And I think that it can build a movement and also empower people to do something at a unique time.
By the way, one other thing, don't go around the paywall. If there's a paper that's doing good state house coverage, subscribe to it.
Yes.
Reward those things that lift democracy.
Yes. And stuff that's available for free isn't great.
We save it's $1.99 a month by signing on to a different computer or whatever. Yeah. You are undermining democracy. If you want good state journalism, local journalism, if it's a nonprofit, support it. There are more nonprofit newspapers popping up. If it's a good in-state journalism with someone covering that state house, subscribe to it.
Right. Let's get back to the list here because we're going to run out of time. So contest every district. This is so important. I had no idea that not every district in this country was contested. Why not? Why is it happening like that?
Because it's really hard. And this is where the conversation is a tough one. This district was designed for you to lose really badly. And you're going to have to take a lot of time to do this. And so if it's only about whether they win or lose that election, a lot of serious people who have lives to lead and kids to raise aren't going to do it. You need to broaden the conversation. Democracy is in the balance. When they rig districts, it's so they have a monopoly on the conversation in 2/3 of the state of Ohio. You running is a heroic act of democracy, and we are there to help you get your message out. And if you don't win, the fact that you ran, we're going to celebrate. And anyone who wins because you ran, you were part of that victory. So if 99 people ran for the state house in Ohio, it would really help Tim Ryan win a Senate seat.
Right,
my hope is some of them would win too. It's a team sport. And I've seen some amazing...
It's working up ballots, not down ballots.
Yeah. Up both ways. I've seen, we had some great congressional candidates in the last couple of years, veterans, pilots, valedictorians of Ohio State, for example. They didn't win, but the lift that their operation brought the turnout elected some of those state reps. And those wins were partly their wins. So you've got to say it's a team sport. And after the election, if they lost, if they want to stay involved, don't let them go anywhere. And in the past, too many sort of party folks, they walk away, they celebrate the 5 wins. It's hard to lose. I've lost. You got your family there. You've asked them to do everything. You got to buck these people up and say, you were part of the long game. Think about the women's suffragists and John Lewis and how they knew it was a long game for generations. And we quit after one cycle. We have to redefine it as a long game for democracy. And anyone who steps up to run needs to be treated accordingly.
Well said. That's really good. Very powerful stuff. The question here is, why aren't well-funded national progressive groups funding ads, grassroots efforts to promote lobbying or of recalcitrant senators for voting rights and filibuster reforms? We sort of covered that, but
my guess is you'll probably see that when we get closer. There are a lot of groups, very passionate. There's a lot of passion in the party for this, and I think we probably will see that. I hate to say it. I'm not sure how effective ads are. I think it might alienate as much as it helps, but I do think phone calls from real live people in these states really matter. And by the way, not just to the senators who are on the fence, but I would call senators who are on the right side and say, I want you to be more loud on this. I don't see from you a sense that this is as urgent as is. And that's giving other people in your Senate a license to not do what they need to do. So, I mean, we've seen moments, Nancy Pelosi, Wendy Davis, where she stood in Texas for hours. I want that. I mean, I'm a good friend of Cory Booker. Cory Booker stood for 20 hours and did that. Right. And he's the kind of guy who would. Only acting that way will wake people up to how bad it is.
I think you're so right. And I think just the president...
McCarthy, the one who spent hours talking. Why aren't we the ones doing that? I mean, why is Kevin McCarthy seem more passionate about what he's doing? Our officials need to not just be on the right side, but need to fight for it. Again, harder than anything they've ever fought for.
And the public can play a role in this. The public can really step up and find the pressure points. If we all knew the pressure points, it would be easier. But if we don't, we'll find out quick enough. If there are things that are beginning to bubble, let's find them. Let's increase the pressure on those big issues. And let's see if the senators
and by the way, give them and understand where people are coming from. That's why I mentioned the guarantee clause. I believe some of these senators are worried about other votes that they think the filibuster will help them on because they actually don't agree with other Democrats. So with those senators, I'd say that's a different debate. That's a different issue. This is democracy. And with democracy, the Constitution tells you what you have to do. And that's a clear exception based on principle that allows you to separate the other issues that you don't agree with. And so I do think not just hitting everyone over the head, although that can help too, but with some of them, get them the arguments that if you think they are legitimately struggling, get them the arguments that they can grab hold. I was in office. I get this. Hey, I want to get to where I need to get, but I don't want to open a door to something else. Help people find their way if you sense that there is some room there.
It's interesting. I mean, I think a lot of these lawmakers assume that they're not going to win in the future, that the party's not going to be in power, and the filibuster is going to be used against them. I mean, that's sort of going in with the worst mindset you could possibly imagine. We have to go into the mindset of winning.
We learned in the Trump era, if nothing else, you learned you never cave to bullies, ever. Then they've got you. That mindset is caving to Mitch McConnell.
Right.
He's a bully. You think, well, if we do this and he's going to do that, so we can't do it.
Yeah.
He's going to do it anyway on the things that Mitch McConnell cares about.
Absolutely.
And by the way, most of what he needs done is happening at the state level. So he doesn't need a bunch of Senate laws to pass anyway. He's getting everything he needs through state laws and judges that he doesn't have a filibuster for to uphold those things. He doesn't care about the other stuff. And so you're letting him win, but you're showing him that you're willing to be bullied because you're scared of what he might do. I don't see them. I never see Mitch McConnell looking like he's afraid that if he did X, we might do Y in 3 years. It's a losing mindset. It's frankly why the Republican Party lost their party, Donald Trump. They got bullied for 6 years. Look what happened to him. So why would we not learn the lesson and let ourselves get bullied?
Absolutely. I think the mindset is so important. And for whatever reason, I love people like Cory Booker who have a real spiritual and soulful sort of presence when they sell their platforms. And I think that, people like that need to really stand up at this time because I think that there's
my prediction is you'll see some of that. I think they're being quiet because they want their colleagues to come along. And I think you're going to see at one point when the vote is called, I think it needs to come sooner. I mean, it's easy for me to say this. I know all the pressures in the White House. I would have done this first. I would have gotten it done because the longer it goes, we saw this with 2010 and 9. Once you get behind other things, those things get negotiated. Next thing you know, you're in March or April, they're running the ads, and it never happens. And again, if you don't do it because you're passing other bills, you're literally making a compromise against democracy. And the lesson, again, going back to 1877, if you are trading that you get other positive things, be the economic or other, and in that trade, you're saying, therefore, we won't push democracy, you are going to lose.
Absolutely.
And never trade for democracy.
Absolutely.
And
that's so much sense.
I think by pushing it back, they made a trade. We'll do these things and then we'll get to this. No, you don't do that with democracy, especially by March and April when you saw how extreme these state houses were getting, amplifying the big lie and then passing all these laws, let alone the new election rigging.
And we have no memory, it seems. We have no memory of how bad Donald Trump really was. And that was a lukewarm version of what we might get in the future. I mean, the first term of Donald Trump was him being nice. I mean, what's going to happen in the next term of a autocratic leader? It's not going to be anything that anyone would want. And people have forgotten that. And because it's of that distance in time, maybe it's lost some of the fire, and maybe all of us need to be re-energizing around how traumatic and devastating and awful Trump was, and how it will get much, much worse if the GOP wins next year.
Let me just make it even worse for you. Other people are more dangerous than Trump. The system they're setting up in states will benefit whoever runs. And Trump was so incompetent on COVID, and he tweeted so much, I think someone else actually could have run a much better campaign and not turned off those voters.
Absolutely.
And so my worry is a brighter, less insane person than Donald Trump, who sees the levers in all these state houses. This is what Orban does, and is savvy about it and is smarter about it than a guy who in the end didn't have enough self-control. If someone else had stepped up and really taken on COVID, they could have had a much stronger re-election campaign. This is why I say it can't just be a never Trump. It's about institutions across this country preparing this trigger that whoever is potentially running in 24, 28 or whatever is going to go benefit from. And that's something that's unique here versus, other strongman type governments. Putin runs everything. Orban runs everything. In America, these state houses run a lot of everything.
Right.
And their work could actually inure to benefit of a lot of people beyond Donald Trump. And in some ways, the Koch brothers might look back and think, sheesh, I wish someone a little smarter had actually gotten in there, because they would have been able to take more advantage of everything they're given through these state houses than even Trump, who in the end had no self-discipline.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly, you look at people like DeSantis, lining up, and he's no Donald Trump. He's much savvier. He knows how to play the media, and he knows the strings to pull. And I think, people like him are very dangerous, obviously, for democracy.
And everything's in place for them to take hold of.
Yeah. So you talk about competing in all 50 states. You sort of mentioned the competing in every district, but what about the 50 states? Is sort of where we started, but just to wrap it all up, how important, and are there individual states that are more important than others, and where should we be focusing our attention?
I mean, as I said earlier, that if you told every donor, let's take 6 or 8% of your presidential spend and divide it up across 50 states and use it at elections at all levels, they'd say you're crazy. And you know what you'd say back? It's what the Koch brothers did. It worked. That's what they did. They decided that they could afford, because they cared about attacking democracy, and they obviously profit from all this. So there's a little bit of a different incentive, but they made that bet in 2010. And on budgets that are quite small, they flipped a lot of state houses, including Ohio's. Democrats were the majority state house in Ohio in 2010, and they flipped it. They flipped them all over. And so you need to fight everywhere. If you only go to federal swing states, maybe you win, maybe you don't, but you're letting them off the hook. Look at what Republicans did. New Jersey, Virginia were blue. They didn't sit back and say, well, forget those states. We're only going to focus on reds. They went right after it. They knock out a governor who we thought would win. They almost win New Jersey. Yeah. They don't think about, in one way, I put this in the book. If you look at that map, there's a network of think tanks that are conservative policy think tanks. It's called the State Policy Network. If you put your arrow on your computer over Hawaii, they have one there. If you put it over Vermont, they have one there. They are pushing this battle everywhere. Again, if we're only in some states and they're in every state, long-term, over time, they'll pick up Missouri 10 years later. Missouri was a close state not long ago. Obama won Indiana. If every time they win a state, they put it in their back pocket and we give up on it because we only stick with certain swing states, they're always gaining, and we're getting a narrow playfield. So the good news is we do have a demographic advantage. So some states, Georgia, and this is why they're being so intense about suppression, Georgia, Virginia, we're seeing changes. Trump alienated suburban women. By the way, again, not everyone may have that problem. So there are things that are helping us, but they play for keeps everywhere.
Right.
And we need to start competing every single state.
Yeah, and they're aggressive on policy. I mean, some of these policies that they make up are, very effective, as we saw in Virginia, with critical race theory and the like. I mean, they're able to ignite issues that the Democrats just don't operate in that way. They don't have the muscle to do that. Yeah. And it's so important to gain that, especially in these next 10 months, although there's plenty to work with. Just bring us back to where we started the show with this idea that these, this caucus of gaslighters are out there trying to distract us from what's really going on. How do people find out what's really going on? The shows like mine, but where else is there a place that you go
this
to?
This is going to sound horribly self-serving.
Yeah.
Please read the book. The book goes through this in a way that it's weird to say, it's painful. How bad it is. As much as you think you know how bad it is, the book will make it feel worse. But then it takes a turn and says, and here's what you can do about it. But I believe until people wake up to how bad it is, they're not going to do what needs to be done. I will say, I want to mention a few
John Avlon is on CNN. He's actually covering this very well. I give him a lot of credit. I've been on the show. He's gotten into some of the details about Ohio's gerrymandering. Some of the MSNBC folks do as well. So there are people doing it. The New York Times had a big story a few weeks ago on it. So it's starting to come around. But I think that a lot of it is on social media, shows like yours. Follow me on Twitter. I try and get it out there. One of the things I'm hoping to do is I do have a website, Laboratories of Autocracy.com. And I've asked people to sign up there. And, I don't know if you've written a book, but you never know what's going to happen. But if there's enough energy behind what I've written, my hope is to use that website, laboratories-of-autocracy.com, to inform people about things that are happening that are quite bad, but also what are things that people are doing that are really good that you should emulate.
Yeah, exactly.
And so
it's so
my hope
important
is to do that. And so if you go to the website, you can sign up. And my hope is to this year think through ways to do that, as much
Even
as
just
I
a
can.
weekly newsletter from you would be really useful for people.
Yeah.
That's laboratories-of-autocracy.com, right? That's the website?
That's the website, yeah.
People can also find you on Twitter by going to @DavidPepper. That's correct?
Yeah. And I just started a YouTube channel, David Pepper for Ohio. My email is davidpepper4ohio@gmail.com. People can go to YouTube, where I also have those videos if they're on YouTube. But the videos are all 2 minutes, and I didn't know what would happen with them. But I did a video on what happened in the 1800s, the one that feels like old history, viewed more than any other by far. 330,000 people. Why? Because they never knew that we had a functioning democracy in the South before Jim Crow set in. So the history and the policy, I try and go through in ways that people might not have confronted before.
I love all that. It's certainly one of the reasons we started Narrative was to bring some context in terms of history to the current events. And it sounds like you can do a lot of that too on your YouTube channel, which is called
David Pepper for Ohio.
Okay. Well, everyone's going to check all that out. I'm sure our audience will be very supportive of you. We will continue, hopefully, to cover these things, and hopefully you'll come back on our show. David, it's been really terrific having you here. And maybe you need a show of your own on Narrative so we get more of your information out there and more of your activism out there. So really eye-opening.
No, it's been great. It's been a great conversation. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for being here tonight. So we'll see you then. The after show will be back on Friday. Thanks for being here on the first Narrative of 2022. Looking forward to a great year with you guys. Have a good night. Narrative is made possible by viewers like you. Join today and support truly independent journalism at patreon.com/narrative. That's patreon.com/narrative.